Marketer of the Day, episode 588. Your big idea. Take massive action, launch a podcast, become the thought leader in your industry, and stay focused with entrepreneur on fire, John Lee Dumas.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Marketer of the Day podcast. We have a celebrity in the house, Mr. John Lee Dumas, JLD, from eofire.com. He's got the Entrepreneurs on Fire podcast. He has the Podcaster Paradise course. He has the Mastery Journal. So much other stuff. How are things, Mr. JLD?
RP, it is great to be here. As I said in the little chat we had, I'm in Maine right now, which is the way life should be. So loving it.
Nice. Living the Maine life in Maine. Mr. World Traveler on vacation out of Puerto Rico. So yeah, I have to admit, I've heard about you over the years. Anytime podcasting comes up, somehow you get associated as the top guy there. And you recently passed 2,000 episodes in your podcast. And something that really just elevated you in my mind from like a really cool guy to someone I need to talk to immediately is I heard this rumor that as far as promoting your business, you appear on 13 shows a day. Is that true, or is that just an urban legend?
It's an urban legend. What I do is one day a month I set aside to be interviewed on other people's shows. And so today actually is that day for the month of June 2018 where I am set aside the entire day to be on other people's shows. And believe it or not, Robert, you are number 12 of 22 interviews today.
Geez, so it's not 13 a day, but you can sure as heck pack so much into one day like a machine. So how do you do it? It seems like it would be easy to get tired after 2 or 3 or 4.
Because I'm like a vampire. I'm basically sucking your energy, which I'm going to then use for the next episode as well. So every single interview I do throughout the day, I just continue to grow more energetic, more on fire, so that by the final interview today, I literally might self-combust.
Geez, craziness. Well, is there a supplement you take for that, or is that just something internal, or do you do any kind of mind work? Like, how do you tap into how do we all tap into this vampiric energy of that the day keeps building on us?
To be serious for a minute, I mean, health and wellness is super important to me. You know, I focus on at least 8 hours of sleep a night. Every single morning is dedicated to me with my health and my wellness. I'm working out, I'm exercising, I'm meditating, I'm journaling, I'm hydrating, I'm putting the right foods, the right supplements into my body so that I'm energized, so that I don't have brain fog, so that I'm not out of shape or I'm not, eating crap. So that's kind of giving me that brain fog. So I really focus on health and wellness. That's my priority, and everything else just kind of falls into place.
Nice. So you set yourself up for success. You don't let things fall to the wayside. You know that there are all these sleep things that are important. Morning time stuff's important. So why leave it to chance? Why not do your best in preparation? That way it manifests itself in the day, right?
You nailed it.
Super cool. So you have this daily podcast, and I think you've made us all up our game, right? Like I have this friend, and I found an old blog site of his from 2005, and I couldn't believe how much things have changed, because this guy's old blog, he'd post maybe once or twice a week or whenever he felt like it. And it seems like in today's world, the way things move so fast, technology's so easy, things are so crowded, it seems like we all need to be getting ourselves out there on social media and pumping up the podcast episodes. It really seems like we need to just be really upping our game, and we can't just get by on a handful of blog posts. I mean, don't you think?
I actually don't agree with that. And I think that was the case for a set period of time. And that is actually why I did start with a daily podcast. And for 2,000 days, that was 2,000 episodes, because I was doing a daily show. It definitely led me to success. I built a 7-figure-a-year business off of producing a daily podcast, interviewing successful entrepreneurs. But we live in a world now, it's just so busy, it's so loud, it's so hectic, it's so crazy. I truly believe that if you just are producing content just to produce it, it's probably going to be crappy, and crappy content just gets ignored. So I'm a huge believer right now in 2018 and beyond going for quality over quantity, which is exactly why back on April 13th, which was episode 2000 of my episode, I used that momentous occasion to shift from a daily show to just twice a week, because I knew by doing that, I'd be able to really up the quality of the podcast. And that's exactly what I did. So now every single Monday, I have a very long, in-depth audio masterclass with an amazing guest on a topic that they're an absolute expert in. And then every Thursday I do a variety show, which is either our income report or I do Q&As with my listeners. I just have a lot of fun with that variety show. So to me, 2018 and beyond, it's all about quality. Quality is going to win. Less can definitely be more.
Nice. I love it. I had no idea that you were changing up that format so much. And I've seen some similar trends with other podcasters. Like I think Pat Flynn did something similar where he had such a quick schedule of all these little episodes coming out. And after a certain point, he said, okay, I'm going to mix things up and not necessarily do less work, but just kind of still putting in the hours and still making sure it's good, but kind of just changing up the configuration there. And so like you said, there's the content creation, but then there's other parts of the business that are really important. And it seems like whenever there's any huge event, especially when podcasting comes up, you seem to be on the lineup. So it looks, again, from the outside looking in, it looks like you dedicate a lot of your business to just dealing with people and making those connections and putting those feelers out there. So can you unpack that a little bit and tell us, like, how important is it for you that we reach out to other people and get these joint ventures going?
I think that we can all say, listen, how can I leverage my time, my energy, my bandwidth? And great ways to do that is obviously podcasting, social media, doing these things that allow our things to be heard in many different ways, in many different forms, and on many different platforms. And it's the same thing when it comes to leveraging partnerships and relationships. And so when we have great friends and partners and relationships that we are able to leverage in a very meaningful way, meaning that I can bring more value, say, to Pat Flynn's audience because maybe I'm an expert in X and he's not, then I can do so. And then since Pat's an expert in Y and I'm not, he can come on my platform and share that. And so now we're able to commingle our audiences and grow together. And so that's just kind of one example of why it's important to really be strategic about building relationships, adding value to others and having them add value to you, kind of have that good symbiotic relationship where you are able to grow together and grow as one. So it's a great world that we live in. We're always going to be better off combining our forces than trying to just be in a silo and grow alone. And I found that to be the case for the last 6 years and something that I'm definitely focused on moving forward.
Nice. So you scratch their back, they scratch yours. And I know that you're a big fan of quotes and things like that. And as you were saying all that, what came to mind was the John Rockefeller saying of, well, instead of just me doing 100%, I'd rather have 1% of 100 people's work. So it makes sense to not just try to go it alone, because, I mean, if one person tried to build the Brooklyn Bridge, how many centuries would that take? But then you have a team, you get it knocked out. So even though it might be a little, I don't know, it might be tough for some entrepreneurs to maybe work at home or introverts and closed off. It might be tough to make that leap, but it seems like that seems to be a common factor in a lot of people who are doing really well, is they're not afraid to just make tons of friends, help tons of people out, and do their best to not go it alone. And so what that brings me to next is I'm always looking for ways to have better time management, get more done in less time. And like we talked a few minutes ago about just how you have your 22 interviews in a day, right? And I like to when I have guests on my show to do 4 or 5 interviews, but I love to just really make things super easy on myself. And it seems like you kind of have somewhat of a streamlined process with your sort of stuff, right? It seems like you have a checklist for the things you go down. It seems like you get questions up front from your guests. It seems like you are really prepared. And I don't think I got that at first. I think at first I was thinking to myself, well, I like the randomness. I'll just kind of let the interview go where it goes. But it seems like that's not super repeatable. So can you kind of tell me what your thoughts on that, on how prepared and how cookie cutter and systematized do you like this podcast interview stuff to go?
It's interesting. So I'm a big believer in adding as much value to the listener as possible on any given show. And so if I was to surprise you with a question that you hadn't even thought of, and you are going to be sitting there, you're going to want to sound smart, you're going to want to seem like you have a nice, quick, witty answer, you're probably going to answer the first thing that comes to mind. And a lot of times, if you're not prepared for it, that's going to be a pretty average to below average answer. That's just a reality. And I found that after doing hundreds of interviews. And now, again, I'm over 2,000. So I've definitely seen that to be the case. On the other side, when people know what's coming, they can just take a second, in an unpressured environment to just think. Maybe they just need to think for 10 seconds. I mean, for me, when I'm coming on other people's shows and they have provided the questions, I just take 15 or 30 seconds to just skim over the questions. And if there's one that just kind of makes me pause, I'll think about it for a second, think about, the direction I'll go. I don't plan out my whole answer, but I just know the direction I'm going to go with that question. And then I'm off to the races. And so when I answer questions on other people's podcasts and I'm prepared for it, they're getting my best. And that's what I want my guests to deliver. I want my guests to give me their best. And by giving me their best, they're giving the listeners their best. And that's just much better than being like, Robert, let me ask you this question. And it's kind of like this curveball that you haven't thought about. And so you come out with this really kind of crappy response. And so for me, it's just all about letting my listeners know, letting my guests know, hey, this is what we're going to talk about. These are some questions I'm going to ask. We're going to spitball back and forth once your answer comes out. And I might throw you a couple curveballs after the fact, and that'll happen. But the reality is I want you to at least start off with a great answer, and we can riff off of that afterwards. And so that's the whole mentality for me there.
Nice. Makes perfect sense. So it's like you can use that, but as a jumping off point, so you don't have to get stuck to those questions. And so when you're on all these shows, you have all these different guests and things like that, do you ever find yourself getting bored, or have you ever just had one of those days when you knocked out all these different interviews and you just said like, geez, I've asked all these people what their favorite tool is, what their favorite book is. Do you ever just kind of get bored with that, or is it interesting every single time?
I feel like if you find yourself getting bored with those kind of questions, then you're just in the wrong field. And that's not a bad thing. But for me, I got into podcasting and interviewing entrepreneurs because I'm genuinely interested. I'm really curious about their success stories, about their failure stories, about their aha moments, about the tools they use to improve themselves. I love that stuff, and I'm really genuinely interested in that stuff. And if you find yourself getting bored, that's a pure indication that you're just in the wrong area, and you need to take a second, step back, look around, and find out something that you're really interested, excited, curious, passionate about. You need to be filling one of those blocks. And so for me, I do. I'm sitting there and I'm really looking forward to that person's answer on whatever question I might be answering them, and enjoying the conversation for what it is. And it's because of that I've been able to do over 2,000 successful interviews, and hopefully have at least 2,000 more in me going forward from here. So yeah, that'd be definitely how I would respond to that.
Well, great. So you find the excitement in everything, and I found something similar too. Like if I have some guest on who is talking about something that I have absolutely no knowledge about. Like half an hour ago, I was interviewing someone talking about franchising. I know nothing about it, but I came into it with the mindset of I'm going to be innately curious about it and ask different questions and kind of get in there and unpack that and take something that maybe when I was an arrogant teenager or in school, I'd say, oh, this has nothing to do with me. But now I'm being more open to kind of the learning. And so you've got 2,000 episodes under your belt. We're going to have 2,000 plus more. And so again, going back into urban legend territory, what I heard about you back in the day, maybe, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, was you were at some sort of conference, and, there was like a panel or a hot seat sort of situation, and someone just threw out the idea of having a daily interview entrepreneur podcast show that just came out every single day. And I guess the legend goes, everyone just kind of nodded themselves and said, oh, that's a good idea, and jotted down that note in the notebook. But you were the only person out of this huge event that actually implemented this one idea that was thrown out, and it's turned into a huge business for you. So is that all just a tall tale made up, or is that how it went down?
I would love to know where you're getting these urban legends from, because that is definitely not how it happens. But I'm definitely a believer in going to conferences and learning. I've gotten a lot of great pieces of feedback, advice, ideas that I've 100% implemented that have helped me grow my business into a 7-figure-a-year business. But, the idea for Entrepreneurs on Fire was pretty simple. It was just me listening to podcasts on a daily basis, saying, wow, I keep running out of episodes because these hosts are only having 1 day a week, twice a month releases. Where's the daily show? Couldn't find the daily show, decided to create it. Like, it was really that simple.
Nice. You found that thing that was missing and you filled the gap. You made the show that you wish had existed. So as we're winding down here, running out of time, can you tell us what you have in store for the future and where people can and should look you up and find you?
Absolutely. So one thing that I've definitely identified, having interviewed over 2,000 successful entrepreneurs, is successful entrepreneurs have one thing in common. They know how to identify what their big idea is and then go all in on that one big idea. And I see that so many people struggle with that because they either have no big idea, they either have a lot of ideas, but they're not sure which is the big idea, or they might think they have their big idea, but they at the same time need some clarity and focus. And so I said, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to create a free training for all of those people. And it's available now. And it's called 3 Hours to Your Big Idea. So Robert, if you and your listeners give me 3 hours, I will give you your big idea. And I'll give it to you for free. So just head over to yourbigidea.io. That's yourbigidea.io. And in just 3 hours, you'll have your big idea and you'll be off to the races.
Well, what a generous offer. Instead of us wasting years or decades going from one thing to the next, 3 hours, one afternoon, we get it narrowed down, and now we know if we should switch tracks or keep that track going. So yourbigidea.io, and that's John Lee Dumas from eofire.com, the daily podcast, but now he's changing up the format as well. But the podcast you need to check out. It seems like every single marketer who's done anything or something is on it. So eofire.com. And thanks so much, Mr. JLD, for hopping on, having a good time, telling us what we need to know. Appreciate it.
Robert, it really was a blast. Thanks for your time, brother.
Heck yeah, same to you. And thanks for listening to that wonderful interview we just ran with Mr. John Lee Dumas, JLD, eofire.com, and yourbigidea.io. Let me throw out a couple of things for you listening audience there as we're winding down this episode. One thing that we didn't cover, but I think is important, is that there's a Chrome extension that can help you to stay focused, and it's called Stay Focused without the E. So it's STAYFOCUSD. That's a Chrome extension. You can set that to block the time-wasting sites that are holding you back from being the kind of person that might crank out 2,000 episodes, that are holding you back from being the kind of person that is a part of 22 interviews in that day. And one thing that really impresses me about JLD, and to be honest, when I first heard of him, I wasn't that impressed, but the more stuff of his I found out there, I liked him more and more, is that he doesn't forget to do that marketing, do that promotion. So many people out there, and this is a recurring theme on our show, but so many people out there are too busy cranking out the books in a vacuum, cranking out the YouTube videos, the blog posts, the products, the courses in a vacuum. And it's really important that you get yourself out there, get yourself as a guest on other podcasts. And if you want to be a guest on this podcast, shoot me a message at robert@robertplank.com. Give me your bio, give me your spiel, tell me your best argument why you think that you should be on this show, and we'll see if we can get something scheduled. I'll have you on, I'll talk about your business. You'd be surprised at how few people actually ask for things and go after what they want, and then as a result, they don't stretch themselves, they don't grow, they don't work the muscle, they don't reach those potential heights that they need to reach. So I was really impressed with JLD's statement that he cranked out 2,000 episodes in 2,000 days. And to be honest, I ran a podcast for 3 or 4 years here, and I resisted the idea of an interview show. I thought I was so smart. I thought that all of my guests would be repetitive. And I realized that I had to expand my thinking, expand my horizons on a podcast. And maybe think about that. Think about how JLD said he ran 2,000 episodes and even just today was on 22 interviews. And I'll give you a tiny bit of behind the scenes about this, is that I knew going in that JLD was limited to a hard 15 minutes. So me personally, when I have guests on my podcasts, I block out a whole hour, but I tell my guests that we're going to run for 20 to 30 minutes. And then if we're on a roll, sometimes we'll go 30, 35, 40 minutes. And if the guest is a real chatterbox, we'll go a full hour, but I plan on doing about 20 minutes. But the problem with that is that many times the show runs the full hour, or it runs 30, 35 minutes between them being a little late, getting their microphone figured out, the missed phone call, the chat before the show, the chat after, and I've really been doing my best to minimize that. But just think, if you really want to push things to the max, if you really have that celebrity status, then be firm in these kind of limits, these boundaries. So JLD said that I call him, and if you're 1 minute late, then our interview will only go 14 minutes. And that's a thing I first heard from Mr. Dan Kennedy, who is one of the most famous internet marketers of all time. When you have a coaching session with him, let's say your coaching session is 30 minutes and you call in 5 minutes late. Well, sorry, now the coaching session is only going to be 25 minutes. So JLD had that hard stop in there, and I made sure to get right to the point and ask all the questions I wanted to ask. But think about this. Here's my point, is that he had this limit of 15 minutes. And I know from what he told me today and when I scheduled the time slot with him that he packed all the interviews, he batched them all up, which is a good time management strategy. He put all the interviews all in one day, 22 almost back to back. And I don't know what his exact behind the scenes were, but I'm assuming that if he had a hard 15 minutes, if it was that close, then I'm assuming that he had either 20 or 30-minute time slots for these interviews. I'm assuming 20. So what that means is that he can knock out 3 interviews in an hour. And if he did 22 interviews today, I'm assuming that he had maybe 8 hours a time, maybe 9 hours if there was a 1 hour block break in the middle there. And then you have to imagine that some guests are no shows, or some guests can't make it, or maybe he has multiple breaks. So who knows? But just think about that concept of the sprint of, instead of having this chore, instead of having to hop on a different podcast episode every day, you just say, maybe I'll take a couple of days off beforehand or afterwards, or switch gears or something, but have that one dedicated day to showing up on 22 different shows. And then that's massive promotion. That's really not messing around. That's treating your business like a real business. So the Stay Focused Chrome extension, the 2,000 episodes, and I'm sure a lot of that was getting ahead in the schedule and automating and scaling and all that fun stuff, outsourcing, delegating. There's the time management aspect of what we talked about. So 22 interviews in a day, that's maybe a 4-minute mile in and of itself, in just pushing things to the extreme as far as what you can accomplish in one day. So that way, all those different interviews play out over the course of many, many months. And it's easy to say, well, I'm only going to hop on, 1 or 2 podcasts a year, but how far can you push it without burning yourself out and without overwhelming yourself before you do it? Maybe you have to build up to that sort of thing and set those boundaries we talked about. That way you can accomplish 22 interviews in one day. You can tell I'm pretty impressed by it. And then I guess to wrap things up, to shut things down here, the most important lesson I got out of that interview we just ran with Mr. JLD, John Lee Dumas, EO Fire, is to build an asset up for yourself that other people want, right? So this guy's a really great networker, and he built this podcast with all this content, with all this guests, with all this name recognition, with all this credibility, with this audience, with this traffic. right? So you build up your website, your podcast with tons and tons of traffic, you build up a huge list, and then when it comes time to go and network with a Pat Flynn or a Tim Ferriss or a Gary Vee, or maybe someone on a smaller scale or someone who is the equivalent of that in your niche, then maybe they already will have heard of you, right? You're already one of their peers. They want to work with you because they want to get that mutual benefit out of that. I mean, remember when you were in high school and you didn't want to hang out with any of the kids less cool than you, and you always wanted to hang out with the kids who were cooler than you, but then they didn't want to hang out with you because they were cooler than you. So do those things to make yourself as cool as the cool kids in high school, if that means that you sell products or have coaching clients or have a list or have a following or do enough networking or something. But don't just cross your fingers and hope to get discovered. Don't hope that you can BS or con your way into joint venturing with who you need to joint venture with. Build up something of your own. That way other people will want you as much as you want them. There's probably a less shady way of saying it than I just said it, but that's okay. We're all about taking massive action. So if you want to listen to that daily podcast, that is EOFIRE.com. And then if you want to take that 3-hour test to narrow down and get clear on your big idea, I'm about to go and take this myself. That is yourbigidea.io, yourbigidea.io. And then what's also great about Mr. John Lee Dumas is that it's helpful to watch what he does. And I visit his site a couple times a month to see what he changes up on his front page. And I noticed he threw in a quiz there recently. He does these things called monthly income reports. And it's interesting to click in and see if he made $150,000 this month, $300,000 this month. And then he gives you a breakdown, and you can make some interesting guesses and observations about, oh yeah, he made all this ClickFunnels affiliate income this month, or he put $20,000 into some sponsorships to get traffic to his podcast, or he sold sponsorships, or he launched one of his freedom journals or podcasting journals. And it's really easy to overlook how refined and simplified he's made some of these things, but I really like the idea that he created one of these bullet journals that a lot of people have, and he made this bullet journal where it's just a daily diary, and then that evolved into another kind of journal called the Mastery Journal, where you pick up a skill, and then he has this other journal called the Podcasting Journal. And that's one of those observations where it's interesting to see how things evolve in that way. In the same way you heard him say his daily podcast, which was a novel new thing at the time, has now evolved into something more long form, a weekly show where he has the guest, and then on the other days he's doing more of the variety show. I find that really interesting. And along the same lines, I just found something on Facebook today that was a salesmanship journal, a bullet journal for, I guess, small micro tasks you can do every day to track your sales and up your skill. And just think about that. If you're trying to sell to chiropractors, maybe you have the ability to make a chiropractor bullet journal. If you're trying to sell to WordPress people, maybe there's a WordPress bullet journal to remind people about WordPress tasks or up their knowledge. But there's all kinds of ideas out there. But what's most important is that you take action on those ideas. You don't let a lot of the details get in the way. You refine later. You create huge problems for yourself, and then solve those problems, and then create even bigger problems, and go out there and take some action, pursue that big idea. Don't forget to stay focused, and then have that discipline, so that way you're not just moving forward without a plan, and that way you're not planning so much that you don't take action. Figure out yourself, be self-aware, and do all those things that are important to grow your business, build a following, and then solve some problems and create the content. But it's easy to get distracted, or it's easy to let let your low self-confidence get in the way of the marketing. So even John Lee Dumas was kind enough to slum it on this podcast. So even the biggest internet celebrities will show up on podcasts. So that means that you should too. So don't forget to be a guest on some of those podcasts. And if you need help with that, reach out to me once again, robert@robertplank.com. And if you liked John Lee Dumas and the things he had to say, I'll plug him for about the 5th time now. eofire.com is his daily marketing podcast, and then yourbigidea.io is the way for you to get clear on what your big idea is, what your big thing is that you will be known for. Anyway, Robert Plank, Marketer of the Day podcast, and we were chatting with John Lee Dumas. Have a great one, and bye now. Check out the latest episodes of our podcast on the web at marketeroftheday.com. And subscribe to us on iTunes at marketeroftheday.com/iTunes, or search the phrase Robert Plank in your iTunes app to find us there.